It is never too early to talk about the 2023 football schedule, so that's exactly what we're going to do on today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. As always, I want to say thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder that the show is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. On today's episode of the show, we're going to talk about or give our way too early reactions and analysis of the 2023 Louisville football schedule, talking about a general overview to begin with. In the second segment, we'll do a little bit more of a deeper analysis into the opponents of the schedule. And then to conclude the show, we'll talk about a possible ceiling and a possible floor for the Cardinals next season. So let's get right on into it. So obviously the 2023 schedule, the opponents are out, but the dates aren't necessarily out yet, which sometimes they matter, sometimes they don't, considering that we already know who Louisville will take on at Cardinal Stadium, who they will go on the road to face, so on and so forth. A couple things before I kind of talk about the schedule in general. Obviously, what we talk about on this show, it is a way too early analysis of the schedule. We're at a point in the athletics calendar where not a lot of football news going on. The basketball team is unfortunately struggling, so it's hard to have consistent content on that. But regardless, I think that this is a good episode to have because I've been seeing a lot of talks about what is to be expected for Jeff Brohm's team in year one in 2023. In a general sense, we need to go ahead and call a spade a spade. Let's begin by saying that just because a schedule looks easy in late January might not necessarily be the case once September rolls around. I know that teams aren't done adding talent. They're not done adding high school prospects, college transfers, so on and so forth. National Signing Day is just under a week away. The portal will continually be active up until the end of the summer academic sessions as players look to transfer after spring ball and heading into the fall camp, so on and so forth. So the teams as they stand today on January 25th might not necessarily be the case. That might not necessarily tell the full story. September or August 25th, I should say. So yeah, you have to look at it in that regard. Take it with a grain of salt because it doesn't have the full context yet. Obviously, you can predict a team to be as bad as you want or a team to be as good as you think they'll be. But that's all it is at the moment is projections, predictions. If a team's predicted to be bad in 2023, doesn't mean they will be, vice versa. So I have to go ahead and get that out of the way because I've had people try to call me out if Louisville lost to a certain opponent that I thought they were going to beat months prior, like the Syracuse matchup. I had been saying all throughout the summer that I thought that Louisville was going to beat Syracuse, that Syracuse wasn't as good as the Cardinals, and well, I guess that's just the drawbacks of having a talk show or podcast, whatever you want to call it, that is accessible on YouTube and to the comments. But regardless, that's enough of me going on a rant. This season, in my opinion, is a golden opportunity. I think that this is kind of the mantra for me heading into year one under Jeff Brohm, is that 2023 is opportunistic. There is a ton of opportunity, both in the out-of-conference and conference slates. Just reading off the opponents so far, Georgia Tech, Murray State, Indiana, Notre Dame, Kentucky, Boston College, Virginia, NC State, Duke, Virginia Tech, Miami, and Pittsburgh. Obviously, the out-of-conference slate is pretty decently tough when you have Kentucky, and Notre Dame kind of fits into that mix as well. But Murray State and Indiana should be wins for the Cardinals. The biggest storyline is with the new ACC scheduling module. That's something that we need to bring back up because it is relevant this upcoming season, because obviously it affects this season and the future. The scheduling module is going to create some interesting seasons. There's going to be some years down the road, like 2025, when the Cardinals have to play Georgia, that it's going to be a tough schedule because of who's on the schedule. But this season is a golden opportunity because it's not so much for me as who's on the schedule, but take a look at who's not on the schedule. There's no Clemson. The Cardinals haven't beaten the Tigers since they joined the ACC back in 2014. No matter how close they've gotten multiple times over nearly the past decade, they haven't been able to beat Dabo Swinney's team. You don't have Florida State. Despite that matchup being competitive almost every single season, Louisville winning as much as they're losing over the past 5 years, it's still an instance to where Mike Norvell's team has been recruiting at a very high level. They have done very, very solid in the transfer portal. A lot of people have them projected as the early favorite in the ACC. I don't agree with that. I think Clemson should be the favorite, but regardless, I look at NC State. I look at Florida State as a top 3 team in the league. Another team that the Cardinals escape playing is North Carolina. Drake, May, and company, no matter what you want to say about the Tar Heels, that's still a very, very solid team in Chapel Hill. So with the Cardinals missing that matchup, it'll be interesting to see how Wake Forest is. The Cardinals will not play Wake Forest either. But and we'll talk about this more in depth in the next segment, a lot of the teams that the Cardinals have to play in the ACC are right now being projected to finish at the bottom of the conference. For reference and to refresh your memory about how the scheduling module works, Louisville will play 3 teams from the ACC every single season. That is Miami, that's Virginia, and that is Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech, despite beating the Cardinals back in 2018 and 2020, I think that this is a favorable matchup moving forward for Louisville. Virginia has a lot of work to get back to the level that they were used to being at just 2 seasons ago. And Miami is kind of an X factor right now because Mario Cristobal and company are recruiting at extremely high levels. Some of the best recruiting in the country, what they've been able to do in the NIL realm, and so on and so forth. But it's still kind of questionable of how that's going to translate to the field, considering that Miami kind of dropped the ball this past season. Outside of that, I believe it's, let's see, so you have 4 non-conference, those 3. I believe it's 5 teams rotate in. Is that how that works? I believe that's how that works. Let's see, so you have Georgia Tech, Miami, Virginia, then you have 4 non-conference games. So yeah, 5 teams rotate in and out. So I believe they say that you will play a home and home with each team in 4-year period. In a 4-year period, you're going to play each team in the ACC twice, a home and home. So I like the scheduling module. But nonetheless, before we break down the schedule in the next segment and tell you why this is a prime opportunity for Louisville and be able to go more in depth on that, I think the mantra is that I keep coming back to is the schedule offers an opportunity right out of the gate for Jeff Brohm to have immediate success here at Louisville, something that this fan base is absolutely yearning for, and an opportunity is really at the helm here. So let's take a little bit of a deeper look. Let's dive into the schedule opponents-wise. We'll do that here in just a second after we talk about our friends and the title sponsor of the show, FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are here, and we're really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On because they are the #1 sportsbook in America, FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. New customers, if you join today, to get started with $150 in free bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet, you just sign up at FanDuel.com/locked on. The bets for the AFC and NFC conference championship games are very interesting. So I encourage you all to go look at FanDuel and check that out. It's an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Football fans, don't miss out. When you place a simple $5 bet, you get $150 in free bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com/locked on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hey, Cardinal fans, thanks again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen every day. Make sure you check out our brand new podcast, Locked On College Basketball. Everything you need to know about college basketball all in one place. Plus, hear from big-name experts, insiders, coaches, and players. Locked On College Basketball, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. So transitioning over into the second segment, we're talking about a way too early analysis of the 2023 Louisville football schedule. First segment was all about how this is a big opportunity for Louisville. Well, why? Why is that? I mentioned that the schedule is not as tough as it has been in years past. For starters, Louisville finished 7-5 in the regular season last year. There were ranked teams throughout the season, but if you look at the ACC as a whole, and really for the past half decade or so, the conference just hasn't been the greatest. Even Clemson, who had 2 national championships in 3 seasons in 2016 and 2018, over the past couple of years, they've struggled. They haven't made the playoff for the past 2 seasons. Now, granted, that's not saying that Dabo Swinney's team cannot recover because, they have a solid offensive coordinator now in Garrett Riley from TCU, who just went to the national championship game. So Clemson's going to be, I think, one of the best, if not the best team in the ACC. You have your Clemson. Florida State projects to be good, but Florida State's been, extremely pedestrian, maybe a little bit higher than that over the past couple seasons. Wake Forest and NC State kind of headline the top tiers of the ACC. It's kind of been hit or miss. So needless to say, the ACC just hasn't been that quality of a conference over the past couple seasons. This season, I mentioned, you're not playing Clemson. You don't have Florida State. You don't have North Carolina. So right off the bat, most places have those 3 projected as the top 3 teams or 3 of the top 5. I want to look at Athlon's, early football predictions from Steven Lasson from Athlon Sports. Obviously, it's one publication. It doesn't reflect the national consensus. There is no consensus, but it doesn't reflect, in my opinion, it's not fair to say that it reflects it. But it just kind of goes to show you where the teams rank. I want to look at this list and show you where Louisville's opponents, from a conference standpoint, where they stand. So you look at NC State. NC State's number 4. I think that's probably going to be the toughest conference game this season for the Cardinals. Sure, they lose Devin Leary, but they got Robert Anae from Syracuse, whose offense tore up the Cardinals in the first game of the season. They reunited him with his former quarterback, Brennan Armstrong, who I feel like with a top college offensive mind and the coaching staff, that's not good news for the rest of the ACC. Brennan Armstrong is a very, very solid quarterback despite what happened in 2022. So NC State, that solid offense with a pretty solid defense is going to be one of the toughest, if not the toughest team that Louisville's going to have to go up against in the ACC. The Cardinals are projected 5th in this ranking, by the way. The Cardinals do have 6, 7, and 8 on the schedule. That's Duke, Pittsburgh, and Miami, respectively. Duke is hard to really grasp where they're at. Mike Elko came in and absolutely transformed the season last year. They went from 9-4 or 3-9 to 9-4. They've got a lot of their offensive pieces back. Riley Leonard's back as the veteran signal caller. And they have a very solid offensive line to protect him. Defensively, They're pretty decently solid, so they have a lot of returning pieces. It's going to be interesting to see how that team can take the step to the next level. So a very interesting matchup for the Cardinals. Pittsburgh, obviously, Pat Narduzzi's team is losing Israel Abanikanda. They have some solid players on the offensive line, the receiver core, Kalijah Cansey, the ACC Defensive Player of the Year, is off to the NFL. Habakkuk Baldonado as well. So there's a lot of defensive guys. They did get Phil Jurkovec from Boston College, who will be replacing Keaton Slovis. So it'll be interesting to see how the Cardinals will play against the team that they beat last season at Cardinal Stadium. Miami, on the other hand, like I said, 5-7 last year. They have a lot of talent. Tyler Van Dyke is back, but it'll be interesting to see if the talent on paper can translate to on the field. So you have three teams in Duke, Pittsburgh, and Miami that are going to be games that are going to be ones that are focused on under the microscope. However, you look at the next slate of games. The Cardinals will square off with number 11, 12, 13, and 14. Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, Boston College, and Virginia fill out the bottom of the ACC rankings on this publication in order. Obviously, last year, Virginia Tech, extremely solid. Brent Pry has a lot of work to do there. It seems like they are trying to build the foundation, but I'm not necessarily sure if they're going to be ready in year two. Georgia Tech fired their coach in Jeff Collins. They replaced it with Brent Key, who was on the staff last year. We'll see how he's able to do with Texas A&M transfer quarterback Haynes Leary. You also have Boston College losing Phil Jurkovec, Zay Flowers, a lot of that offense. A team that really, really struggled to end the season. Virginia, fixed to be the worst team in the ACC. You lose Brendan Armstrong. You lose a lot of players on an offense that struggled defensively. You have some turnover as well. So from a conference standpoint, this is sort of a favorable schedule. Sure, you have 4 games on the schedule that you have to focus on. NC State, Duke, Miami, Pittsburgh, but all 4 of those are going to be winnable games. The other 4 are games that Louisville should definitely win. Georgia Tech, Virginia, who's the other one? Not Miami. Georgia Tech, Virginia, and why do I need to go back at Boston College? Needless to say, sure, any team can win on any given day, and Louisville's MO is that they lose to a team that they're not supposed to at least once every year, but they should win those games. You look at the out-of-conference slate. Kentucky and Notre Dame are the 2 headliners. Notre Dame serving as a non-conference rotated piece in. That's going to be a tough game. Possibly Louisville's toughest. They will have both Notre Dame and Kentucky at Cardinal Stadium. Notre Dame notably brought in Sam Hartman from Wake Forest to join Marcus Freeman's team. The Fighting Irish definitely caught stride at the end of last season. So I don't think that this is far-fetched to say that whatever point that the Cardinals played Notre Dame this season, it's probably going to be ranked. Notre Dame's probably going to be ranked. I don't necessarily think it's going to be a hot take to suggest that probably going to be the best game that Louisville will have to face. Kentucky has reloaded in the transfer portal, replacing Will Levis with Devin Leary, who is a solid quarterback. I've said it time and time again on this show the past 2 years. They've had some solid transfer portal additions. Vanderbilt's running back, a defensive back from Cincinnati, some offensive linemen throughout to replace some of those issues. They lose some pieces, but they also bring a lot back. Sure, they lose Chris Rodriguez. They lose some players on that offense, but Barryon Brown is back. Dane Key is back. I believe Tavion Robinson is back. Defensively, they lose some pieces. Justin Rogers on the interior of the defensive line. Carrington Valentine in the secondary, but still a solid team. A winnable game for Louisville, in my opinion, but still it's going to be a tough matchup regardless. And then you have Murray State and Indiana. Sure, the Indiana game, Power 5 team up in Lucas Oil Stadium. The Cardinals should be favored in that as well as the game against Murray State. So breaking down the schedule, it's going to offer an opportunity to get some solid win totals. We'll look at those win totals here in just a second when we talk about ceilings and floors. But the conference slate, you miss out on having to play Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina. In the non-conference, you have 2 games against teams you should win, Indiana and Murray State. And then you have 2 games that are going to be tough to win in Notre Dame and Kentucky. But let's talk about ceiling. Let's talk about floor. Before we do that, I want to say thank you all for making us your first listen of the day once again. Just a reminder that the show is free on all streaming services, including YouTube, WHAS 11+, 5 days a week, your team every day. All right. Talking about ceilings, talking about floors, this is what I'm seeing the most of in terms of conversation throughout the offseason. What's the realistic expectation? What is the ceiling? What's the floor? Realistically, expectation-wise, I'm going to say 8 wins. Louisville as a program is one that wins, in my opinion, when they're a solid program, they win 6 to 8 games consistently. And then you throw in the occasional double-digit win season. 6 to 9 wins is, when the program is where it needs to be, that's where it kind of fluctuates to, and then you have double-digit wins here throughout. I think 8 wins is respectable because it's year 1 under a new coach. You're learning a new system. Sure, I think that this team has the potential to be better than last year's team. Solid recruiting class coming in, solid transfer portal additions, solid nucleus of players returning. Offense is projecting to be electric. Defense has some question marks, but they've got the personnel to be very, very solid. So I think 8 wins is solid. I think that it's realistic because it offers you the chance to lose, in my opinion, at most 2 out-of-conference games and 2 in-conference games. So in my opinion, that's maybe losing to Notre Dame and Kentucky, and then losing to losing to 2 of Notre Dame, or losing to 2 of NC State, Miami, Pittsburgh, and Duke. Or it's losing 1 out of conference games and 3 conference games. That's realistic expectations. What I don't want to do is I don't want to be too, big of a sunshine pumper and say that this team's going to win 10 games off the bat. Because if they don't get there, if they get to 8, and we're like, oh, well, they only got 8 wins. That's not a bad number, especially in year 1 of a coaching change. So I'm looking at 8 as a realistic expectation, but I do acknowledge that the ceiling is higher. I think the ceiling, in my opinion, is 10 wins. I don't think that this is going to be a TCU situation with Sonny Dykes to where they run the table right away. I think that is definitely an outlier situation. I think that if everything clicks offensively, Jack Plummer comes into this offense and really has a solid season. The Cardinals are able to assert their will on the offensive end of the field. Defensively, they may have some struggles, but the personnel steps up. The scheme fits the personnel, and they're able to find some success. I think the ceiling is 10 wins, in my opinion. Regular season, of course. I think realistically, you're losing to Kentucky and Notre Dame and winning out in the conference play, which I don't necessarily think is realistic. I think if you hit your ceiling, that means you win 1 of Kentucky or Notre Dame, and then you drop an ACC game. And if you only lose 1 ACC game, if you win 10 games, there's a good chance that you are playing for a conference championship. So obviously that's the ceiling to me. I feel more comfortable talking about the ceiling with a team led by Jeff Brohm than I do a team led by Scott Satterfield because of the offensive explosiveness and how that relates to the modern college football realm in terms of offenses. Floor-wise, I think that I think that this team is going to be pretty solid. I think that maybe it's 6-6. I don't necessarily think so. I think the floor is probably going to be 7-5, in my opinion. You look at it as you lose to both Notre Dame and Kentucky, and then you lose 3 ACC games, whether that be Duke, Pittsburgh, Miami, and NC State, 3 of those 4, or you lose to a team that you're not supposed to in Virginia, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, or Boston College. So, and that's kind of worst case scenario. I think Notre Dame's going to be, I think all these games are going to be winnable games, especially with Notre Dame and Kentucky being at home. I think one of the toughest games might be at NC State. Usually that game is somewhere in the late October time, and it always seems to be a night game on the road in Raleigh. So with the solid offense there, a solid defensive coach as well, that NC State game is probably a top three, one of the most toughest games on the schedule. So those three are the ones that I'm circling as, the ones that are going to determine how high of a ceiling this team will have. But it's evident that this team will need to take care of business. They're going to have to beat the teams that they're supposed to beat to reach the floor, to reach the expectation, and to reach the ceiling. So I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I'm saying that if it's going to happen, it will likely be this year because the schedule permits it. Like I mentioned, the out-of-conference schedule is doable. Kentucky and NC State, or Kentucky and Notre Dame, are two tough games, but in my opinion, winnable games. And then you look at the in-conference slate. I keep saying it. You're missing the big three going into the season: Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina, and playing a lot of the bottom of the conference. So looking forward, I wish the football season was next week, but it's only January 25th. But appreciate you all for tuning in. That's going to wrap up this Wednesday edition of the show. On tomorrow, we'll talk about Gabe Sisk from Ballard as it pertains to if he should get a Louisville offer. We'll talk about some more football recruiting and some more basketball recruiting. So stay tuned, and we'll see you back very, very soon tomorrow.